This tutorial will show you how you can leverage the GraphQL support in Oracle content to display data in a Vue Js application. As a base, we will use the Vue Js Minimal Sample, a simple two-page application written in Vue Js 3 that uses the Oracle Content REST APIs to load its data. This has been extended to include a new people page that will get its content from the server via GraphQL. Looking at the application, we see the original two pages, Home and Contact Us. If we look at either page, we can see that it is divided into sections. There is an announcement section and a data section below. Each of these sections was retrieved using separate calls to the REST API. Now we look at the people page. Again, this page is divided into sections. There's an announcement section and a details section discussing different people. All of this data was loaded with a single call to the GraphQL endpoint on the server. Now let's look at the code. But first, a caveat. There is a plugin called Vue Apollo that can be used to retrieve and efficiently process GraphQL data in a Vue Js application. Unfortunately, this currently only supports Vue Js 2, and while Vue Js 3 support is in development, it was not available at the time this sample was written. For this reason, this sample will use the crossfetch library to make post calls to the server to run the GraphQL queries. As you will see, this is a bit of a lower level solution, but still quite a simple one to implement. Only one new dependency was needed to be added to the package JSON file to support the GraphQL calls, crossfetch. This library adds the ability to write code that can make calls on both the application server and client side in the browser, a feature that is required for the minimal Vue.js application. The next file we will look at is the GraphQL service.js file. This file contains the code that will call the GraphQL endpoint of the content server and return the data of the people page. As you can see here, it sets up to make a fetch call passing the GraphQL query in the body of the call. Once the data is returned, it calls an internal function whose job is to simply massage the returned result to make it a bit easier to use when rendering the data. One further point to note is how the code handles proxies. When run on the browser, the code will use the browser proxy to connect to the Oracle Content Server, but if it is invoked on the application server, it may still need a proxy. So this code will use the same proxy used by the Oracle Content SDK when making REST calls. If we want to see the data that is being returned by the call, we can use the GraphQL Explorer that is built into Oracle Content. For instance, here is the same query that we had in the source code with the value of the slug and the channel token hard-coded for simplicity. If we look at it here, we have the announcement banner from the top of the people page, and then we have a list of all the people items that we displayed below as shown here. Since we are not using the Vue Apollo integration to handle the GraphQL support, we must consider how the data derived from the query will be stored and then passed to the component that will render it. The existing application uses Vuex to manage the REST data, so the same approach was taken for the GraphQL-based data. Looking at the file source vuex index.js, it can be seen how this code will call the GraphQL query code and then store the data to be retrieved by the component. Page.vue is the next file we will look at. Its purpose is to call components to render the different sections of a page in the application. Using each page's unique slug value to identify it, the code will decide what component should be used. For the pages based on REST data, the task is handled by calling the section view.component. If the slug is equal to people, however, the ID of the GraphQL-based page, it calls the person view component to render that data. Finally, we have person.view. This is called by page.view with a copy of the people page JSON data obtained from the Vuex cache. As you can see, it's passed in as GQL data, and then that is used in a template to fill in the various elements, creating the final people page. Thank you for watching this tutorial on using GraphQL and Vue Js to access and display data from Oracle content.